So today we're going to try and explore the internal landscape of schizophrenia, which, is a condition that so often feels just beyond our grasp. Our guide for this isn't going to be a textbook. It's Marin Sardy's incredible memoir, The Edge of Every Day. And what it gives us isn't a clinical breakdown, but a series of really personal, deeply human sketches of a reality that's been fractured by mental illness.
And right from the jump, Sardy hits us with this haunting idea. Now, obviously, the illness itself isn't contagious, but the incoherence it creates, that state of madness, that can absolutely ripple outwards, touching and, completely reshaping the lives of everyone around it. It really sets the stage for a story that's as much about family as it is about the illness itself.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the disintegration loop to see how schizophrenia can just unravel a life. Then a tree falling, which tells the story of her brother's silent descent. After that, we're going to attempt to map an inner world to really try and understand psychosis from the inside. And finally, we'll see how in the face of all this, you can still find what she calls fragments against ruin.
Okay, so let's start with that first part, the unraveling. This whole section is about trying to define an experience that almost defies definition and seeing how a person can seem to just, disintegrate.
Okay, so what are we talking about clinically speaking? It's important to know it's not a single disease. It's a syndrome, which means it's this whole constellation of symptoms that just distort the very foundations of reality, perception, thought, emotion. But honestly, this definition only tells a tiny fraction of the real story.
Because for the author, as a little kid watching her mother go through this, that clinical term meant nothing. To her, the illness was this, a dark, shapeless thief. It was something that just crept into their lives and stole the person she knew, leaving this huge absence in their place. And that feeling of loss is just so central to everything we're going to talk about. And I mean, just look at what that disintegration actually looked like. A vibrant, beautiful woman just retreats from the world, completely consumed by fear. She barricades the doors, she develops an entire alternate reality, this paracosm, with shifting tectonic plates and secret colonies, all to make sense of a world that just doesn't anymore. And maybe the most terrifying part of all, in her mind, her own husband and son weren't real. They'd been replaced by imposters.
Now we're going to turn to the author's brother, Tom. If his mother's illness was this slow, creeping fade, Tom's was more like a tree falling in the forest, this huge catastrophic event that, for the longest time, no one was really around to even hear.
You know, what's so powerful here is how normal these steps look. It didn't happen all at once in some dramatic explosion. It was this gradual slide, a series of small, almost unnoticeable collapses that, when you add them all up, ended with him living on the streets of Anchorage, Alaska.
And on the streets, he became this figure, known by the bright yellow raincoat he always wore. People called him Mr. Rain Jacket. This image just becomes this powerful symbol of both his presence and his isolation. He was right there, visible to everyone, but truly seen by almost no one.
You know, a local newspaper columnist actually struck up a conversation with Tom once, and this is what he said. It just so brilliantly illustrates how his internal world and the external world were colliding. To anyone else, he's just a man staring at a rock. But in his reality, he's a guardian, protecting treasure from hidden enemies. For years, Tom was completely trapped in this heartbreaking cycle, the revolving door of care. A crisis would happen, he'd get brief institutional care, and then he'd be released with basically no support, which, of course, would just lead to another crisis. And for his family, it was this state of constant, helpless pain, captured so perfectly by his father's question, what's harder, seeing him suffer or not seeing him at all?
So, that's the outside view. But how in the world can we even begin to understand what that inner world is like? In this section, we're going to try to map a reality that's just operating by a completely different set of rules. So there's this concept in psychology called theory of mind, and it's something most of us just do without even thinking about it. It's our ability to guess what other people are thinking or feeling. But in schizophrenia, this is often impaired. It makes connecting with others so profoundly difficult, and it also makes it almost impossible for us, from the outside, to really map their experience.
And that brings us to this really fundamental, mind-bending question. I mean, how do you map a mind when time itself loses its flow? When the past and future just dissolve into what Sardy calls an infinite present?
just a sequence of disconnected moments. What does experience even mean then? How do you form a coherent self?
So, what are some of the landmarks in this inner world? Well, it can be a state where the self and the world just kind of merge. Time, as we said, breaks apart. The delusions can be terrifying for sure, but they can also be beautiful, even rapturous, like believing you have crystalline wings. And then there's this, and it is absolutely crucial, a condition called anosognosia. It's a neurological inability to recognize that you are ill. It means refusing treatment isn't just being stubborn. From inside that reality, it's the only logical thing to do.
In the end, Sardy uses this incredible term from old maps to describe her brother's experience, Ultima Thule. It was a phrase used to mark the edge of the known world, the empty regions on the map. And it's her way of admitting that some territories of the human mind might just remain fundamentally unknowable to the rest of us. So if the world and the self can collapse that completely, how do you go on? Our final section looks at the small, intensely personal ways we find and create meaning in the face of absolute ruin. When language just fails you, when you can't possibly articulate the grief or the chaos, what do? You turn to what you can hold. You turn to objects, to totems, to things that can carry the meaning when words no longer can.
For the author, this new language was built from a small collection of personal charms, like a little plastic tiger which her mother sent her for no apparent reason.
Or a mirrored disc that, in the brutal desert, could feel like the sun's anvil. And paper dolls, which represented past selves, ready to be offered up to a fire. Each one of these objects becomes a word, a solid piece of meaning in a world where language had completely failed.
And this quote just brings it all together. She's borrowing a famous line from the poet T.S. Eliot to explain what these objects really were. They weren't just random trinkets. This was a deliberate act of survival. These were the fragments she gathered to build a defense against an absolutely overwhelming ruin.
And that really leaves us with this final question to think about. When all the structures we rely on, family, reality, time, even our sense of self, when that whole scaffold collapses, what are we left with? Sardy's work suggests the answer lies in these small, deliberate acts of making meaning, the very human insistence on finding something, anything to hold on to, even in the void.